They say a mother always remembers, and it's true, I remember everything. The day my daughter was born, her tiny fingers curled around mine like she was afraid the world might take her away from me. Her first steps in our cramped kitchen, the sound of her laughter echoing through our threadbare home. And later, the sound of silence when she stopped speaking to me as much, when her voice became filtered through formality, professionalism, and something else I couldn't name then, but now I know it was shame. My name is Rosa, I've never had much. I grew up poor, married young, lost my husband even younger. When he left, he took with him the last scraps of my innocence and any illusion that life owed me anything. But he gave me her, Isabella. My reason to get up every morning. My reason to work 2, sometimes 3 jobs, cleaning offices at dawn, working at a diner at night, and selling crocheted scarves at the weekend market. Everything I did was for her. She was bright, beautiful, and fiercely determined. Even as a child, she stood out. Teachers praised her, neighbors adored her, and I, who often came home with cracked hands and a sore back, would sit by her bedside and whisper, "One day, Mihija, you will rise above all this. You will be someone," and she did. Oh, how she soared. Scholarships, a top university, internships that led to powerful jobs. A new world I had only seen through television screens and magazines was suddenly within her grasp. But with every step upward, it felt as though she drifted further from me. At first, she called every day. Then once a week, then only on holidays, and even those calls became short, efficient. She still said, "I love you," but it sounded like punctuation. I understood, or tried to. I didn't want to hold her back. I wanted her to be free of the weight I had carried my entire life. I didn't need her to come back, I just wanted her to remember. So when the wedding invitation came, hand-delivered, written in a script I barely recognized as hers, my hands trembled. I read it a dozen times, not because I didn't understand, but because I needed to convince myself it was real. The note inside was short: "Mommy, please come, dress nicely, we'll talk more there." Dress nicely, I stared at those words for hours. What did that mean? What was nice enough for Isabella's world? I owned 2 dresses, one for church and one for funerals. Both had seen better days. I spent the next 3 weeks saving every coin, skipping meals, and sewing at night under dim light. I walked miles to the outlet district and found a second-hand store with a lavender dress that clung too tightly at the waist and had a missing button. I altered it myself. I found a pair of shoes that didn't squeak when I walked. I even had my hair done at the local beauty school, where a student named Maya gave me soft curls and said I looked elegant. Elegant, no one had ever called me that. The morning of the wedding, I rose before the sun. I packed my handbag with tissues, mints, and a handkerchief Isabella had embroidered as a child. My hands shook as I fastened the clasp of my purse. I looked in the mirror, barely recognizing the woman who looked back. There was dignity in my reflection, a quiet sort of grace, and behind my eyes, a storm of hope. The venue was an estate, the kind you only see in movies. Grand gates, marble columns, fountains that danced under the sun. A valet took my invitation and asked for my name, then looked me over with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He waved me toward the back garden. The ceremony had already begun. I was late. Rows of white chairs, all filled, silk canopies, floral arches, and a string quartet playing something light and airy. I spotted Isabella from afar. Her dress shimmered like starlight. Her back was turned, but I knew that silhouette. I had bathed that body as a baby, held it through fevers and heartbreaks. Now it stood beside a man with sculpted shoulders and a perfect suit. An usher, without speaking, directed me to a seat near the back, behind a stone column. I sat alone. No one turned to look at me, no one asked who I was. My chair wobbled slightly on the uneven grass, but I dared not adjust it. I dared not make noise. I watched them exchange vows. Her voice quivered, his was strong. They kissed. Applause erupted. My hands came together hesitantly, then stopped. I looked around. Everyone was dressed in elegance I could only dream of. Laughter rang out, cameras flashed, champagne flowed. A woman beside me whispered, "Are you with the groom's family?" I shook my head. "No, I'm the bride's family." She nodded politely, then turned away. After the ceremony, the guests moved to the reception area. Round tables with golden centerpieces, tiny name cards, and silverware that probably cost more than my monthly rent. I searched for my name among the place cards. I couldn't find it. A server pointed me toward a small table near the kitchen entrance. No card, just a seat. I sat again alone. I smiled at the waitstaff who looked at me with vague curiosity. I tried not to feel it, the emptiness, the exclusion, but it crept in like cold water. From my corner, I could see Isabella dancing with her new husband. Her smile was radiant. She looked happy. That was enough. I told myself that again and again. During dinner, I picked at the food. I didn't recognize half of it. My stomach was in knots anyway. And then, as dessert was being served, the groom stood and tapped his glass. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began. His voice was rich, confident. "I know this is the part where I'm supposed to thank everyone for coming, praise my beautiful wife, and tell you how lucky I am, and I will, but first I want to tell you a story." The room hushed, even the chandelier seemed to lean in. "Years ago I was lost," he said. "I had nothing, no home, no job, no direction. I was hungry, cold, and convinced the world had forgotten me. I wandered into a neighborhood I didn't belong to, searching for food, maybe a miracle. And then I saw her, a woman sitting on her stoop crocheting. She looked tired, worn, but kind. I must have looked pathetic. I didn't even ask for anything, just stood there. She looked up and said, 'Are you hungry?' And when I nodded, she disappeared inside and came back with a sandwich, a warm drink, and a blanket." Gasps rippled. She didn't ask my name. She didn't care where I came from. She just gave. She told me, "One good meal can remind a man he matters." And that night, I slept under a tree with a full stomach and a renewed will to try again. He paused, looking out at the crowd, then his eyes settled on me. I searched for her for years. I never forgot her face. I never forgot her kindness. And today, as I was walking through this crowd, I saw her. She's here, at my wedding. The guests turned. I felt every gaze land on me like waves. "Rosa," he said, "will you please stand?" My legs trembled. I rose slowly. The room held its breath. "That woman," he said, "saved my life. I owe everything to her. And the greatest joy of my life is that I now get to call her family." The bride's face turned, her eyes locked on mine, her mouth fell open. "That woman," he continued, his voice thick with emotion, "is the mother of my wife, and now my mother too." The applause was thunderous. People stood. 1,000 lights blurred behind my tears. Isabella took a hesitant step forward, then another, then she ran. She ran through the crowd like a child again, the hem of her gown fluttering behind her like a memory undone. When she reached me, her hands trembled just like mine had that morning, and her face, so poised moments before, crumpled into something I recognized. Not the polished woman she had become, but the little girl I used to carry through thunderstorms, the one who would press her ear against my chest and say, "Your heart sounds like home." She didn't say a word at first, neither did I. Her arms wrapped around me, tight and desperate. My arms, which had held her through every sorrow of her childhood, found their place again. I smelled her hair, and it was like jasmine and guilt and hope all at once. And just like that, I forgave her, because mothers do. The groom came too. He kissed my cheek. The cameras flashed, 1,000 moments bottled in 1 second. We sat together then, not in the back, not near the kitchen. They pulled a chair from the main table. Her friends whispered. The in-laws raised their brows, but none of it mattered. My daughter held my hand under the table. Her eyes, swollen with tears, searched mine for forgiveness she didn't have to earn. Later that evening, as the dancing resumed, she led me to a quiet corner. There were lanterns hanging low from the branches, and the music was faint behind the hum of night. "Mommy," she said, and her voice cracked. "I was so afraid they wouldn't understand, that they'd see you and not the version of me I tried to become." I nodded. "You were ashamed." Her chin fell. "Yes, and I hate that I was." I placed my palm on her cheek. "Shame is a heavy thing, Hija, but it only has power when we let it speak louder than love." She cried. She told me of the times she wanted to invite me to events, to dinners, to meet people. But the polished world she had entered had rules, unspoken, brutal rules. And in that world, there wasn't room for women with calloused hands and thrift store shoes. So she compartmentalized me, she locked me in the past, but tonight her husband had blown the door wide open. He knew about you, she said. He told me that story years ago. I didn't connect it. I didn't even remember, but he did. He searched for you, and when he saw you today, he told me, that woman is your mother. I would know those eyes anywhere. I smiled because fate has strange ways of circling back. I had given that man a sandwich once, a piece of bread, some kindness, and now he gave me back my daughter. We sat under the stars a long time, not mother and bride, just two women weathered by time, learning to speak without fear again. We sat beneath the stars until the music faded into the night and only the sound of wind in the trees remained. She rested her head on my shoulder the way she did as a child after long days, as if somehow that small gesture could undo all the years between us. And I let her, because in that moment we weren't mother and daughter divided by class or success. We were simply two women trying to remember how to love each other without fear. The next morning I woke in a small guest room within the estate. The walls were white, the sheets perfumed with lavender, and a small note was on the nightstand. Breakfast at 9, we'd love to have you join us. E. I had barely slept. Emotions knotted in my chest and my body ached not just from age but from the weight of what the night before had meant. My fingers trembled slightly as I smoothed the dress I'd so carefully mended and wore the day before. It now bore new creases and faint wine stains at the hem, but somehow I couldn't care. That dress had carried me through one of the most painful and miraculous nights of my life. In the dining room, I found them both. Isabella stood the moment she saw me, as if still unsure if she deserved to look me in the eyes. Her husband, my son-in-law, I realized, smiled and embraced me without hesitation. I hadn't been hugged by a man like that in decades. It startled me, it soothed me. Sit, he said. We made café con leche. It was perfect, just how I used to make it. We talked for a long time, about everything and nothing. They asked questions about my life, not the version Isabella knew, but the parts I had kept to myself. I told them about the nights I cleaned toilets in office towers that sparkled with light, wondering if someday she would sit behind one of those gleaming windows. I told them how I used to walk blocks past her school just to watch her laughing with friends unseen, just to make sure she was smiling. I told them about the years I ate rice and beans every day so she could afford better shoes or school supplies or that summer camp she thought was a miracle. Isabella cried through most of it. He held her hand, and in their silence I felt the sorrow of realization blooming inside her. I thought, she said at one point, that to become someone important I had to leave behind the person who got me there. I didn't respond. Some things don't need answers, just grace. By the afternoon, the last guests were leaving. The staff was cleaning, folding tablecloths, boxing up leftovers. I stood in the back garden staring at the chairs where I'd once sat alone. Isabella came up beside me. She said nothing but slipped a thin envelope into my hand. I looked down. It was ivory with gold edges, my name, Mommy, written in her handwriting. The same script that once labeled her school books, her birthday cards, her apology letters. I was going to mail this, she said, voice low, but I never had the courage. I opened it. Inside was a letter. It read, Mommy, if you're reading this, then I've finally found a way to tell you what I haven't been brave enough to say. I've made mistakes. Not in the way I lived, but in what I chose to hide. I was embarrassed, not of you, but of how people might see you. And in doing so, I became someone I never wanted to be. I'm sorry. I am who I am because of you. You didn't just raise me, you built me from your own bones, your time, your hunger. I've been so blind to that, but I see it now. If you'll let me, I'd like to start over, to learn who you are again, and for you to know the real me, not the image I curated for the world, but the woman you molded with love. Love is a... Tears blurred the words, but I didn't need to read them twice. I folded the letter, held it to my chest, and pulled her close. No words, just breath between us. Later, she asked me to stay a few more days. I wanted to refuse. I didn't belong in a mansion with silk sheets and silent hallways. But something in her eyes asked me to say yes. And so, for the first time in my life, I did. I stayed. Each morning in that grand estate felt like walking through someone else's dream, and yet somehow it had become mine too. I woke to silence, not the clatter of the city or the creak of my old apartment's pipes. I ate meals at a table I once believed I'd only ever serve, and Isabella, she stayed near, closer than she had been in years. She followed me into the kitchen as I cooked familiar meals. She asked about my favorite flowers. She listened. On the third morning, I found myself in the garden again, early enough to catch the dew still clinging to the petals. I had always loved mornings, before the noise began, before the world asked for anything. Isabella joined me with 2 mugs of coffee, no words, just a soft presence at my side. "I called Carmen yesterday," she said eventually. Carmen, the woman who had helped raise Isabella when I had to work double shifts. I hadn't spoken to her in over a year. She had moved away, grown sick, and I hadn't had the bus fare to visit. "She says hi," Isabella added, "and she wants to see you. I offered to drive us next week." I didn't know what to say. Gratitude felt too small. What I felt wasn't just thanks, it was the slow healing of a soul that had hardened against hoping. That afternoon, she brought out old photo albums I hadn't seen in decades. I didn't know she had kept them. Inside were crinkled images of birthdays in our tiny kitchen, holidays spent with second-hand decorations, and snapshots of a child whose light hadn't yet dimmed under pressure. Isabella ran her fingers over one photograph, a black-and-white print of me, holding her on my lap, both of us grinning at nothing. "I forgot she existed," she whispered. "Who?" "Me, that girl in the photo. I forgot what it felt like to belong somewhere simple." She looked at me then, and there was something deeper in her gaze. Not pity, not guilt, just recognition. "I want to make things right, Mommy, not just between us but for you. You deserve more." I shook my head. "You've already given me everything I ever prayed for." But she wasn't done, not yet. The following day, she drove me to a little brick house nestled on a quiet street. There was a garden out front, roses, hibiscus, and even the yellow daisies I used to grow on our windowsill. I thought we were visiting someone, a friend, an old neighbor. "It's yours," she said. "Well, mine for now, but soon yours." I blinked. "Issa, I can't give you back the years you lost, but I can give you mornings like this. A home, a garden, a place that's yours without asking." I touched the fence. It felt real, too real. She opened the gate and led me inside. The walls were bare but clean. The windows let in so much light I thought I might float. In the kitchen, there was a small wooden table, 2 chairs, and a ceramic bowl in the center filled with fresh oranges. The smell made me cry. "Why?" I asked, unable to contain it. "Why all this now?" She held my hands. "Because I spent too long giving the world everything and giving you nothing. Because I didn't know how to hold both pride and humility at the same time. Because you never stopped loving me, even when I did." I had nothing left to say. My heart was swollen, too full for words. So I did what mothers have done since the beginning of time. I kissed her forehead and said, "Come, let's make dinner." That night, in that new kitchen, I cooked arroz con pollo while she peeled plantains and danced barefoot to the radio. It was like time folded over itself. I could almost see a little girl twirling in place, her laughter bright as sunlight on a clean floor. That night, after the dishes had been washed and the radio had gone quiet, Isabella and I sat together on the back steps of the little house. The moon was bright, casting silver light over the garden. Crickets played their songs, and the air smelled of warm soil and night-blooming jasmine. I could feel the weight of peace settling into my bones, an unfamiliar, welcome ache. Isabella leaned her head against my shoulder. "Do you ever miss it, the old life?" I took a breath. Sometimes, not the struggle but the meaning. When everything was harder, every moment meant something. A loaf of bread, a clean shirt, your laughter. Now everything is easier, but sometimes it feels thinner. She nodded. "I've been thinking about that a lot. I spent so long chasing a life that looked good in pictures. I forgot how it felt to live one that actually felt good." In the silence that followed, I felt years fall away from us. The next week, Isabella kept her promise. She drove us to visit Carmen. The old woman sat on her porch wrapped in a shawl, her smile toothy and tired but radiant. When she saw me, she shouted, "Rosa, you stubborn mule, you didn't call." We hugged, rocking side to side, tears falling freely. For an hour we laughed like young women again, and Isabella sat at our feet listening. She heard stories about herself, things she had forgotten or never knew. How she once sang to the moon from the rooftop, how she tried to build a treehouse out of crates, how she used to say, "One day I'll be the president and buy you both crowns." On the way home, Isabella whispered, "I think I lost her for a while, the version of me that dreamed like that." "She's still there," I said, "you just stopped listening." We spent days together after that, building rituals, morning coffee on the porch, Tuesday markets for fresh fruit, Sunday dinners where she insisted on setting the table perfectly, as if making up for all the meals I had eaten standing, rushing between jobs. But the world doesn't pause forever. One morning she said she had to fly to New York for work, just a few days. I smiled and nodded, but a part of me stiffened. The old ache returned, the sense of being left behind. "I'll be back soon," she promised, "and I'll call every day." She did. On the first night she called from the hotel lobby, her voice was breathless, full of the usual bustle. On the second night she sent photos, her in a sleek suit standing beneath glass towers. On the third she forgot. I didn't panic, not at first, but by day 4, when she still hadn't called or replied, I felt that cold silence creep in again. Then, just before dawn on the 5th morning, headlights swept across the windows of my little house. I opened the door to find her standing there in sweatpants and a wrinkled blouse, eyes red from crying, her suitcase abandoned on the front walk. "I couldn't stay," she said. "I went to the rooftop bar, the same place I used to celebrate every deal. I stood there and all I could think about was you. Sitting here, probably drinking cinnamon tea, maybe folding laundry, and I realized I didn't miss the skyline, I missed this, you." I held the door open, she stepped inside. "Mommy," she said quietly, "I quit my job." The words didn't shock me, they should have, but they didn't. "What will you do now?" I asked. She smiled, a little broken, a little brave. "I want to start something that matters, maybe a nonprofit, maybe a community kitchen, I don't know, but I want it to be real." I looked around our modest kitchen, then back at her. "Then start it here," I said. And she did. The next months were a blur. Isabella poured herself into building a space that offered meals, support, and dignity to those who needed it, just like I once gave that young man a sandwich and a blanket. She named it La Mesa de Rosa, Rosa's table. Every day I helped cook. Every day she greeted people with a warmth I hadn't seen in years. And every night we sat together again on those back steps, sipping tea under the stars. Our lives were simple, but no longer quiet in the way silence used to feel. This silence was earned. This silence hummed with peace. La Mesa de Rosa became more than a kitchen. It became a story whispered from one hungry mouth to another. Go there, they don't just feed you. They see you. And every person who walked through the door carried their own burdens, just as I once did, just as Isabella had, though hers were wrapped in silk and success and mine in apron strings and aching feet. Burdens still. Volunteers came, neighbors donated what they could, and somehow, without plans or blueprints, a movement grew. One day, a woman left a note next to her empty plate. "Your food reminded me I'm worth saving." Isabella framed it and hung it above the stove. The mayor visited, so did the local news, cameras flashed, microphones came. But Isabella always said the same thing: this place started with my mother's hands, everything else is just seasoning. On the 1-year anniversary, they hosted a small gathering. Just a few people from the community, some old friends and those we had served. There was music, paper lanterns, a banner made by children that read, "Thank you, Senora Rosa." When they asked me to say a few words, I stood slowly, my palms damp, heart trembling. I had never spoken into a microphone before. "I don't have fancy words," I said. "I'm not used to speaking for crowds, but I do know what it means to go unnoticed. To be passed by, to be looked through, and I know what it means to be remembered, to be seen. My daughter built this place, but not just for others. She built it for me, for every mother who cooked in silence, for every woman who folded dreams into pockets and kept going." I looked over at Isabella then, her eyes shimmered. "And if you ever feel invisible," I said, "come sit at our table, I promise we'll see you." The applause was soft but real. the kind that comes from people who understand. Later that night, long after the lanterns had been taken down and leftovers packed, Isabella and I sat alone in the kitchen, just us again. "Do you ever think about the wedding?" she asked. I laughed. "Which part, the hiding or the healing?" She winced, then smiled. "Both." "I think," I said, "that maybe being hidden that day wasn't the end of something. Maybe it was the beginning of everything that came after." She nodded slowly. "I think you're right." We fell into silence again, but it wasn't empty. It was the silence of full hearts, of deep roots finally touching rich soil. As the night wore on and the world outside our window softened into sleep, I realized that life had not forgotten me. It had simply waited for a daughter to find her way back home, for a mother's hands to be honored, and for love to take root not in gold or grandeur, but in a humble kitchen lit by hope. This time there would be no to be continued, because this was not a pause or a chapter break, it was a full stop. And the beginning of everything.